Welcome everyone. This is the ACSM Online Week 2020. It's our second series of webinars. We had one last year, and ACSM is the Association of Coaching Supervisors and Mentors, and we're promoting coaching supervision and mentoring to help coaches grow and excel as much as they can in their field. So I'm Marianne Dupuis, the president and co-founder of this association. And today we have the great privilege to have José Ferreira with us. José has been working as executive coach for the last 15 years, also working as a coaching supervisor for the last 6 years. He's been part of the faculty of the Coaching Supervision Academy, where I had the privilege to meet him and work a bit with him. He is really very supportive of ACSM since many years, and we are grateful to have him today as well, and being part of this community. And today, Jose will speak about safety in group coaching, how important psychological safety is key and critical for any work in group or team. So we will have this in the following format. So Jose will share and will ask you along the way to ask questions, and you can participate in the chat for that. You are most welcome to also ask questions at the very end. So please type them in the chat, and I will definitely ask them later on to Jose after his sharing. This webinar is recorded, so please, when you ask any question or when you share, no name, and be comfortable sharing, given that it is still recorded in public. On that, I will now invite Jose to share, and we will definitely enjoy this webinar together.
Thank you, Marianne. So first of all, why I thought about psychological safety, that could be something interesting, because I think now all of us have been hearing this expression more and more often recently. Not as a coach, but as a facilitator, as a leadership consultant, I have been asked by an organization to come and do some work in order to create psychological safety in the organization. And we talk a lot about psychological safety when it comes to group work, group supervision, or group coaching, or team coaching. And there's always this perspective, since that it's one again of those trend terminology that we use, but what it is about. As part of that work with that organization, I got to know one book which was about creating psychological safety in the workplace, and I thought, I mean, what are some of these concepts that could be useful when it comes to group work, and what kind of experience do I have when it comes to group work in terms of creating psychological safety. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about some concepts, but I also would like for you to reflect as we go through this webinar, for you to think about your experience in groups. I'll be asking some questions, and I'd like for you to reflect back on your experience as you went through a group, either as a group participant, either as a participant in group coaching, or as a facilitator of a group coaching, or group supervision, or team. So think, and it may not be necessarily just in terms of group coaching, but think about your experience when it came to working groups or working in teams, because it would be interesting for you to use that as a reference. First thing that I would like to bring is that when we think about psychological safety, I mean, the word safety may bring that idea that it's about coziness, or about being nice, or kind of a warm environment. You all feel kind of good and comfortable. And when you think, really, when you're talking about psychological safety, it's not necessarily about that coziness, about feeling comfortable, but it is about an environment that allows me to learn, to grow, to develop. And we know that probably I don't learn, I don't develop if I'm feeling too comfortable. So psychological safety is about creating that environment, people feeling safe to be challenged, for example, or people feeling safe to have some candid, direct conversations, taking risks, willing to ask for help. So that's a lot when we think in terms of psychological safety. But doing all that in a respectful environment. So am I feeling that I'm in a place where it's safe to be myself? Am I feeling that it's safe in a place to be vulnerable? So it's important to think, what is our understanding when it comes to psychological safety? This book that I read, I mean, from Amy Edmondson, and you saw a little briefing, he started studying psychological safety in the 90s. So it's something from 30 years ago, although probably we hear this terminology a lot more in the last 5 or 6 years. And interesting, she was studying teams from hospitals. She decided to do research with teams from hospitals, and she was studying teams from hospitals that were high performing, that were considered at that point high performing, very cohesive teams. And what she thought it was interesting that those teams were reporting to making a lot more mistakes, not necessarily fewer mistakes. And she thought it was interesting. I mean, how come these teams are considered to be high performing, to be very cohesive? How come they are reported to be making more mistakes? And her theory is that, in fact, the teams, they have a safe enough environment that allow them to talk more about those mistakes. So maybe they're not necessarily making more mistakes compared to other teams, but by talking more about those mistakes, they were also becoming higher performers. And that was coming from that psychological safety. One other aspect for you to consider when you talk about psychological safety is human nature. And what are the challenges when you think about the human nature to build that psychological safety, for people to feel psychologically safe? First of all, as part of the human nature, human instinct, we all want to look good. And we know that's part of human nature, right? We as humans, we want to look good. We want people to think that we are good enough. We want to feel part of a group. So that impacts a lot our level of psychological safety. And also we know that learning, as we are learning as human beings, that necessarily we are going to make mistakes. There are going to be failures. And we don't want to look bad in front of people. So all those aspects impact when you're talking about psychological safety. So here I'd like to throw a question to you. When you think about your experience with groups, and as I said, I mean, it may have been an experience as a facilitator, as a participant, and you think of a group, a team where you're part of, where you didn't feel safe. And what were the reasons why you didn't feel safe? So if you can think for 10 seconds and then maybe write some points in the chat room. So let me give you 10 seconds to think. When you think of a group, it may be a group supervision, it may be a group coaching, it may be a team that you worked with. What was happening there that didn't make you feel safe? I see that someone says, I didn't feel safe when I was hearing cynical statements. Members were not sincere. If I trust the person, that's also a big word when it comes to safety and trust. I think they go very well aligned together. Anything else? People laughing or mocking at each other. Everyone was looking at their phones and not interested in what each other had to say. You know? They have some different agendas. So when I have my own expectations of myself and how I should behave in front of others, so that I may be challenged. What are my expectations? What are my assumptions? Or one person catching all the attention and not leaving space to others. So thank you. So I think you see, I mean, as you're sharing, it's interesting to see how different things were important for different people. And when it comes to group work, one of the challenges, how can we provide that psychological safety, knowing that there are so many different expectations, so many different assumptions? What would be some I would not say requirements, what would be some things that could help creating that psychological safety? And one thing for you to remember is that if you are facilitating a group, you are also a member of the group. I mean, even if you are the leader of the group, what about your psychological safety? Do you ever ask yourself, as the group leader, what do I need in order to feel as psychological safe in this group? There's another comment here. So you don't feel safe when a group member begins to share something that is sensitive or related to other members in the group. So all these things may impact that psychological safety. And as I was saying, I mean, it's always that perspective. The leader has to go first. And when we talk the leader or the facilitator, you should not forget yourself. Recently, I had an experience where I was having a group supervision session, and something happened that I got triggered in that session as I was facilitating. And then as I was reflecting after, and I went through my own supervision, I realized that probably I was paying a lot of attention to the psychological safety of the other people, of the team, of the participants, of the coaches in that group. And I think we go with that perspective. As the facilitator, I'm creating an environment that is psychologically safe for the team members. And as I said, I mean, we may forget that I'm also a team member. And I realized that what was challenging for me in that specifically session is that I was not noticing, I was not paying attention to my needs when it comes to psychological safety. So it's always important for you to think, as you're facilitating a group, am I paying attention to my needs also when it comes to that psychological safety? And in order to create a psychological safe environment, there are two things that you need to consider. We would say there's the structural part and there is the behavioral part. And I'm going to talk a little bit about these two things. The structural part is very much about that contracting. And we often think that contracting starts in that first session. Last year, I had done a session here on the webinars about contracting. It's a major area that we need to consider. But then how does that contracting starts that would help that psychological safe? It's even on a pre-contracting phase. You are already providing the structure. And let me give you an example here. Recently, I just attended a workshop on group supervision. And the way that psychological safety started being created, I mean, we got a confirmation of our attendance. So I got a confirmation of my attendance. And then in that confirmation, there was a request for the facilitator was asking permission to share our email addresses with the rest of the group. So already that provides that safety that I'm in control. I'm in control of how much I want to share or not share. So we started by that, the facilitator asking us permission to share the email addresses. Then once I gave permission, and I believe that everybody in the group gave permission to share the email addresses, there was another email before we came together, inviting people to share a little bit about themselves, what they would like for the group to know about themselves, what drives their work in terms of what are the motives, and these are all experienced coaches. But then in that email, what it was also interesting is that there was an invitation to share, and it didn't say you have to share. Again, that perspective that allowing for people to come into that new space as they felt comfortable. And as we debriefed in the first day, that initial email, it was very interesting how people perceive it differently and how that had an impact on how safe they were coming to the group or which assumptions they were coming to the group. Because some people read the email and thought, I mean, the way it's written, it means I share if I want to, and that's okay. And I feel comfortable and I decide if I want to share. Other people read the email thinking, no, I have to share something about me. So that was a whole initial discussion in the first morning of the workshop, which I thought it was very interesting. What do we bring to these conversations? I mean, what level of vulnerability, what is impacting ourselves feeling safe in that new environment with that new group? One other thing for you to consider that would impact psychological safe in group work is what kind of relationships were there in the group before? Do people, they know themselves already? Do people don't know themselves? I mean, one other thing that we debriefed during that first morning as we were getting together, it was interesting to hear how some people were looking at the email addresses to think, do I know this person or do I don't know this person? To decide how much they were going to share on that initial email. Or some people who were very excited that they were going to a group where they didn't know some people. Some people concerned, I work with this person, so intentionally I will try to work with different persons, different people during those 2 days. That's not under our control, right, as facilitators. What is under our control is to invite people to share, allowing them to share if they want or not. But then as part of the creating that psychological safety when everybody comes together is having a conversation about those initial reactions. One other thing that I think it was very important on those initial emails is that the facilitator also clearly says that you have, as you come into this group work, be mindful of your own stuff. Because we are talking here about group supervision or team coaching. We are not talking about counseling, about psychotherapy. Be mindful, but also the facilitator says, you are responsible to take care of yourself. So we as a group, we are creating an environment where you can learn, where you can grow, and you can develop yourself, but you also have to take care of yourself. And I think that helps on that safety in terms of I'm coming to a group where everybody's responsible for themselves. We are here to take care for the well-being of the group, but I'm not responsible for everybody. One other thing that when we come together, we do the whole contracting, right? Which is very important in terms of that psychological safety. And quite often we are asking, what are the expectations that people they have on that group? What are they coming with? What are they expecting? As part of that conversation, so one thing that I think it's important to mention, when you're talking about psychological safety, probably we don't create it in one go. It's part of the journey. There is, for example, the pre-contracting, that's very important. It starts there. And that pre-contracting probably starts 3-4 months before you even start working with the group. And then people come together, you have that contracting, that initial conversation. As part of that conversation, what can help, for example, if you try to have people talking about 4 things, and not that everybody would need to talk about everything, but I mean, one question that helps people bring a lot more of themselves and can help create that safe container is asking them, as you're coming to this group, what are your hopes? What are your fears? What are your expectations? And what are your assumptions? So what are the hopes, fears, expectations, and assumptions? And again, not everybody will answer those 4 questions. You don't have to have everybody answer those 4 questions, but it's more a reflection. I mean, what are my hopes as I come to this group? That will impact how safe I feel in this group. My hope may be that I enjoy. My hope may be that, I mean, I have a good time. My fear may be, what about if I don't like this group? And I still have to work with them for another 7 sessions. How to step out of this? Expectations, as we said, I mean, we often ask that question. But then, what are my assumptions? I mean, there was, someone wrote in the chat earlier when I said, can you think of an experience where you didn't feel safe? And someone wrote about the expectations of myself, how I should behave in front of others. So do I think that I'm coming to this group that I have to perform, I have to be the best? As it was interesting, as I said, when we got that email from that workshop, that people read it kind of, I have to write something about myself. What does that say about me? What does that say about the way I'm going to be interacting with people? So having these conversations will allow a lot for starting to create that psychological safety on the pre-contracting phase, and then as you are doing that contracting. Now I would like to ask you, again, if you can write on the chat, when you think about a group or a team where you felt psychologically safe, what helped you feel psychologically safe? What was present in that group or in that supervision group, coaching group, that helped you feel safe? And you cannot just say it's the opposite of what you said before, because it would not have been the same experience. So again, 10 to 20 seconds and start writing on the chat what helped you feel safe in a group. So I see here, so people were open to share their feelings. There's confidentiality. There's freedom granted to share or not share. So the facilitator suggested the importance of mutual respect. There's trust. The moderator is present, knowing that if something goes bitter, she will intervene. So there's a trust on the capacity, the skills of the facilitator. And when I see some things that you're writing, for example, people felt, you wrote here, so there was mutual respect, there was trust, there's confidentiality, openness to share their feelings. Also think, and you don't have to answer that in the chat, but try to think, there is also, I see here, common intention to support each other, to be open-minded, to welcome what will come. And I'm assuming that that didn't happen just because you wrote that on a flip chart, right? Each one of you wrote that on a flip chart. I'm assuming that that happened because as you start getting to know each other, as you start sharing, that psychological safety got created. Someone else also said not too much confined to a session structure we have to follow, but freedom to disrupt what was planned. Yes. Everyone in the group listen and respect the views of each other without any judgment, verbally or via body language. Yes. So again, I mean, you don't have to write on the chat, but try to think, when you think about that experience, how did got created? I mean, what were the enablers? Because I mean, if everybody in the group is listening with respect, or if I feel that I can share some more things, or if there's trust, there were some enablers. Probably it didn't happen after 5 minutes. And I think that's also something important for you to consider when you're talking about psychological safety. We create it together. It is the responsibility of the facilitator to provide that structure, to role play, to demonstrate some behaviors, to show that vulnerability. Also, I mean, as a facilitator, you are coming to that group with hopes, with fears, with expectations, with assumptions. And how you role model that, how you communicate that, will help people feel more comfortable in terms of communicating that. So what are some of those enablers for you to allow for that? But not only the facilitator. Do we provide a structure? Do we contract that everybody is responsible for that? Is everybody responsible to take care of the well-being of the group? Is everybody responsible to take care of the safety of the group and intervene if it's not happening? So I talked earlier a little bit about contracting. And as you are contracting, thinking which questions am I not asking? And that's a very good, interesting question to a group. At some points, as you're doing group coaching or as you're having a workshop, if there's something that you feel, I mean, that intuitive part of you that feels that there's something not working, ask the group, are there questions that we are not asking ourselves? Or are there some things here that are happening that we are not allowing ourselves to talk about? So remember, when we talk about psychological safety, it's about having candid conversations. There is some disruption, but it's a safe disruption. It's where I feel that I'm respected and I can talk about my vulnerabilities. One other question that I think can be quite useful, and it may be difficult for people to answer it, but ask people, what would need to happen for you to not feel safe in this group? Are we voicing enough? Or one other thing is that, how will you step in or how will you interject if your psychological safety is challenged? Are we making agreements on that? We often say, yes, I mean, we are all allowed to say something, but are we being explicit on the kind of questions we are asking? So think about what would need to happen for you to not feel safe in the group. And it may be different for each one of us. If we have a group of 6 or 8 people, and it's important to hear from each one of us. Or how will you interject? How will you step in if your psychological safety is challenged? Are we contracting on that? Because we contract about respecting each other. We normally contract about trusting, about the listening, about paying attention and not disruptive. So it is a very emergent kind of work. And the more emergent, the more uncertain, the more the individual voices are essential. So to bring those individual voices into that conversation is going to be even more essential for that psychological safety. So it's really important, as I said, I mean, as part of the how to, first there's that setting the stage. That pre-contractual part, the contracting part when people come in together. And then how do you invite engagement from people all the time? What does that mean in terms of group work to keep people engaged? So are you asking questions directly? Are people feeling comfortable to ask questions directly? If I ask a question, if someone in the group asks a question, and then really genuinely listen to the answer, that creates psychological safety. One other question for you to consider as you are, let's say that you are working with a group with several sessions. So we're talking here about group work where there are several sessions. It may be possible when you come to this 3rd session or at some point to ask the group, so let's think about our last group session. Was everything as safe as you would like it to be? So when you think about our last group session, was it safe enough? mean, just the question that I asked you, the two questions I asked you so far. Can you think of a group where you didn't feel safe, or can I think of a group where you felt safe? We can also do that reflection as we are working with a group. Can we think about our last session? Was everything safe, or was there something that made you feel unsafe? And have a conversation. It's always about conversations. It's definitely always about conversations. One thing that we did in this workshop, which was, again, it was very insightful for everybody as we attended it. We talked about triggers and distractions. And again, I think one thing that you are noticing from what I'm saying so far is that having conversations is probably the biggest enabler when it comes to psychological safety. It's not just having a contract. It's not just having things written on a flip chart. It's keeping those conversations going. So we talked about triggers, and someone, I think there were some comments earlier about people making judgments or people being sarcastic about each other. Some of you had shared that comment. So the question that was asked to us as the group, what did someone, and that was I think it was sometime in the afternoon of the second day, so it was not necessarily on the first day, on the afternoon of the second day, the facilitator asked us this question: what did someone do or say today that you felt triggered? And it maybe got you irritated, got you frustrated, you were judgmental, but also, I mean, it can be you delighted, you're fearful. And we had small groups on talking about that. But then the conversation was not about the person who did that. So it was not necessarily, if I take the example that someone earlier said that if there are sarcastic comments in a group, probably, I mean, was it intentionally sarcastic or not? But if there are some, let's say, disrespectful comments, or someone just say something and triggers something on you. So the conversation we had in our small group, it was not about the person, and it was not about giving feedback to the person, but it's for us to notice what had triggered and what happened that challenged our psychological safety. And then as we notice that, as we notice our reaction to that, how does that impact our work as coaching supervisors, as group facilitators? And I can share my example. I feel pretty comfortable. So at some point, someone was mentioning people that she had worked with, and talked about how those people had helped in terms of her professional development. And someone else intervened later, saying that she felt a little bit hurt because that the first person didn't mention her name or forgot to mention her name as part of supporting her professional, the other person's professional development. And I was in the middle of both. And that triggered a very deep sense of discomfort. And as I was reflecting, I mean, I got challenged in that situation. I felt, is this safe or not safe? And I noticed that the discomfort was about people being direct. And how does that impact my work, or the level of discomfort that comes to me, or my psychological safety is sometimes impact if people are too direct in a group, or if I have to be too direct as the group facilitator. I don't always feel safe. I feel uncomfortable. So it's for you to think about, as you have worked in a group, think again, what were some triggers that challenge your psychological safety? And I think, I mean, you listed here, right? I mean, some of them when you didn't felt safe. But reflect again as you reflect back on those moments. And I saw some comments that maybe the other person didn't have the best intention. We are making an assumption here. With an assumption that everybody has the best intention, can you think of situations where something triggered that psychological safety, which was not necessarily intentionally, but try to think, what did you notice about yourself? I mean, what does that reaction tell us about you? What does the reaction tell us about you in terms of what is important for you when it comes to creating psychological safety? So again, a little, because I thought it would be interesting for you to go away with some possible questions, some possible exercises. Think about this. Probably you're not going to ask this question in the very beginning, right? But at some point, what did someone do or say that made you feel triggered? Irritated, judgmental, frustrated, bored. And then the next question would be, what did you do with that reaction? Or what did someone do that challenged the psychological safety, your psychological safety? What did you do with that reaction? What does that reaction tells you about your work, you as a professional? And one thing that it was good about this exercise, we didn't necessarily have to share. If people want to share, feel comfortable, again, that will help on that psychological safety. I go back to that point. Psychological safety comes with the more voices you hear in the room, the more psychological safety you'll be able to create. One other thing that I thought it was, as I was reading that book, it talks about a study that was made with Google some years ago, and they found out that the most powerful predictor of team performance at Google was psychological safety. So I thought that it was quite interesting. If we translate that to a team, to a group supervision, to a group coaching, probably we could say that the most powerful predictor of people learning and growing within that group is going to be psychological safety. So there's a very robust correlation between psychological safety, learning, and growth. And isn't that what we are looking for in terms of outcomes when we are doing group work? We are looking for learning, we are looking for growth, we are looking for some kind of performance. So I think I would like, and I'm going to open for some questions, but I would like to summarize a little bit some key points. I think when you're talking about psychological safety, first of all, it's not that notion that everything is cozy, everything is warm and nice, and I feel comfortable. It is an environment where I feel comfortable to be challenged. It is an environment where I feel comfortable to have candid conversations. It is an environment where we can challenge each other, I can take risks, I can make mistakes, and I learn from that. And that's when we are talking about the importance of psychological safety in group work. Also, two things to consider. There's the structural part, that it's your responsibility, and there's the behavioral part. I mean, the behavioral part, it's also someone, I'm going back to that word, sarcastic. That's probably, we would know that that's going to impact psychological safety. And how come is that being allowed in the group? It's the responsibility of the facilitator as we are doing that contracting. What is allowed, what is not allowed. Psychological safety also starts at the pre-contracting stage. So don't think that psychological safety will start necessarily in the moment that we come together and we have our contracting conversation. It starts at the pre-contracting. So if you're running your own group, that initial email that you send, pay attention to that, because it will be the first step to that psychological safety. As simple as asking people's permission to share their email addresses with the rest of the group, it's already an initial step on that psychological safety. telling people that they are responsible for the well-being of the group, but also for their self-well-being, and they have to take care of themselves, it's also important for psychological safety. Allowing people to share or not share is part of that psychological safety. And then it comes to the contracting. Right? I mean, what are certain things that we expect? The confidentiality, for example. Some people mention the confidentiality. And a question that I would ask is what this confidentiality means for you. Because quite often we hear that when you are doing contracting, someone in the group will say confidentiality. What this confidentiality means for you? Because there are different levels of confidentiality. And quite often we think what happens in the group stays in the group. Are there other levels of confidentiality? So it's also important to define that as you go into that contract. 4 things to explore. What are your hopes? What are your fears? What are your expectations? And what are your assumptions as you come into this group? It allows for a nice, very nice conversation. One thing that I've learned when it comes to group work, and normally you learn by not doing it, and then you realize you should have done. We may think, oh, I'm going to do some contracting for 20 minutes. And I still want to make the rest of that initial session quite useful for everybody. My experience lately is that probably my first session when it comes to group work may be all in contracting. And that will help that psychological safety. We never do enough of contracting, but that's a different conversation. But definitely it helps a lot of that psychological safety. And then, I mean, how do I keep people engaged? Are we as a group giving people permission to voice out if they're not feeling safe or if something happens? Or if there are triggers that are challenging that psychological safety, are we giving the group permission? Are we checking? Are we as a group, are we noticing when that is happening and allowing for that voice to come out? One thing that I wanted to bring here, a lot of things that I've said today is about when you are running a group. But I know that some of you, for example, may be coaching a group or maybe supervising a group of internal coaches, for example, where you didn't have, it was not your decision on how people are coming together. You are not the one selecting the group members. So it takes a different view in that area, but it's still, as you're having conversations with the sponsor, you may bring some of these points in terms of how we are going to communicate. What are certain things that we have to make sure that it's happening? Even more if you're doing some group work inside an organization. Team coaching or group coaching or even supervision and coaching of other coaches. So think of all those points. I think I have talked a lot, I have covered what I would want to cover, and I would like to open for questions. And Marianne, anything else or any questions that you think it would be important for me to address? If you have any questions, you could write on the, so what would be the best practices to intervene or not intervene as a facilitator when something not allowed by the group is actually taking place? And I think, I mean, because you are using here something not allowed by the group. And here, I think it is about being direct. Because if you say that it's not allowed because it was agreed by the group that it should not be allowed, that's when, from a behavioral perspective, from a role modeling perspective, it is the responsibility of the facilitator. And the facilitator may not necessarily say, so you should not do that. The facilitator may open to the group and say, I'm noticing that we are not respecting what we have agreed before. How is that coming up to the group? So I think it will depend how far in the group is in terms of having very candid, open conversations. But if it is something that was agreed that by the group that it was not allowed, it would not be only the facilitator responsibility, but hopefully the group will feel responsible for also intervening in those situations. But if the group is not intervene, I think it would be the responsibility of the facilitator to voice it out. Because as I said in the beginning, you as the facilitator, you are also part of the group. And if something is happening that is challenging you, you are not going to be the most effective. You're not going to be the most resourceful as that facilitator. So it's also you taking responsibility of you being at your best as you're facilitating that group. Did it answer that question? How often do we need to check how is the psychological safety going? That's a good question, because it's probably strange. It would probably be strange to keep asking people, are you feeling safe? Are you feeling safe? That would be a little bit not natural. I mean, one example that I gave, right, that could be a question that you can ask at some point. So, for example, think about our last group session. Was everything as safe as you would like it to be? So we can do those check-ins during one session. Probably it would be artificial to keep. I'm going around. Let me give a very short answer. I'm not sure there is a recommended frequency in terms of how often. And probably I would not say that you should be asking, are you feeling safe? There would be different questions to be asked. I mean, at the end of the session, how was the session, or what worked, what didn't work? That will also allow for you to check if the people is being safe. But if you want to be a lot more explicit, it's that question, as I said. So in the session today, were there moments that you felt triggered? And it may not be necessarily using the word safety, but if someone felt triggered, that means that their safety was challenged. Should we talk today about triggers, for example? Again, it will depend if you want to, and if you suggest for people, so should we talk today about triggers, and everybody says, no, I don't feel the need, you would take a different direction. Any other questions? Can you revert on you are responsible for yourself, and not for others, yet we want the whole group to hold each other accountable? And what I mean by that, you are responsible for yourself. You are responsible in terms of your psychological safety, in a way that if everybody, let me give you an example. If I am in a group where there are people that there are one or two people who feels very comfortable being very vulnerable and sharing things that are really very important for them, brings a lot of vulnerability. And I may feel that just because other people are being extremely vulnerable, I have to be vulnerable at that level. And I'm not sure that I can. I'm not sure that I will be able to cope with that. I'm not sure that I will be able to manage that level of vulnerability. So that's what we mean by you are responsible. If you want to be extremely vulnerable, it's also important for you to know how to manage that vulnerability. Because it should not be just, let me throw to the group all my vulnerability and you take care of me. So I still have to be able to take care of myself. So it's about holding each other accountable at some level. But when I say about you are responsible for yourself, is when it can go deeper And you have to be able to self-manage that level of disclosure, for example, of vulnerability of what you're bringing into the conversation. Did it help clarify? And again, another question for you to the group. You have been a little bit quiet for a while now. I know you're quiet, but have you had experiences where clearly psychological safety was challenged in a group? And how did you see the facilitator handling that? Maybe some one of you had those experiences where, because initially I asked you if you were in a group where you felt that your psychological safety was challenged or you didn't feel safe. But can you think of an experience in a group where clearly psychological safety for the group, there were issues, it was challenged, and can you share how did the facilitator handle that situation? Would anyone have an experience to share? I give you 10 seconds, so because then we give people time to write on the chat. Anyone with any thoughts? It doesn't look like. So let me ask you another question. Thinking about what I have shared today, what would you do differently, or what would you do when you are running a group to ensure psychological safety? What is one thing that you are taking away that will help you as you run a group in terms to enable psychological safety? And that one I would like to hear from everybody, or for everybody to write. So someone says pre-contracting is something I will start to do. Anything else from the others? Let me read here. So there was a group I was in that believed in not sharing job titles, but just names and what they do. Then a person came in and he started saying he was a senior manager. The facilitator highlighted behavior and encouraged everyone to follow the group rules. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So that's, I think, goes back to that question. If we see that someone is not following it is the responsibility of the facilitator to remind about the group rules. So someone else says, so far I've taken that for granted, but moving forward, I'll make sure I cover the psychological safe part when pre-contracting. And pre-contracting, it's not just about sending a contract beforehand. Because I know that some of us send a contract beforehand. So it's thinking about, are my communications to the group already creating a safe space? Or how am I communicating to the group? Will that allow to create that safe space? So someone is also, I will also borrow the freedom to disrupt what was planned, offering the flexibility will come what will come. And that's always kind of, it's as I had this experience with this group supervision workshop, it's really, really interesting to see the difference, because someone had that flexibility. Someone was expecting flip charts. Someone, and we are all coaches, we are all supervisors, so we know what emergent means, but we still have those expectations. Go back to those 4 points that I highlighted: hopes, fears, expectations, and assumptions. I mean, what are my assumptions? Are my assumptions that in order for me to learn, I need a rigid structure? Are my assumptions that in order for me to learn and feel safe, it has to be emergent? So we all those under those assumptions. So my takeaway would like to be more aware of my personal needs in the context of psychological safety while facilitating a group session. I realize my personal psychological safety is a critical enabler for the group to feel so. Thank you. And that was a learning, I will not say a learning, but kind of an insight I had 2 months ago, in spite of this experience of talking about psychological safety in a more challenging group session. That's where I realized it was a very important insight for me. My personal psychological, what are things that triggers me? And what do I notice as I'm getting triggered as a facilitator? And then am I feeling safe to share that with the group? So need to feel very safe myself to their asking, is there something happening that we're not allowing us to discuss? So I need to reflect on my own personal psychological safety. And remember, psychological safety is about taking risks, but feeling safe to take risks. For us as facilitators, it will be challenging because we come with that mindset, I'm here to take care of the group. And yes, we are there to provide a structure, take care of the well-being of everybody. And I know I'm repeating myself, you are also part of the group. So you're also there to take care of yourself. So anything else? Or Marianne, I see that there are 2 minutes remaining. Would you like to allow for something else, or are you going to close? There's, I see a little bit more. One more comment. I believe in the importance of a psychological safe group where people can feel comfortable. That's how people can be vulnerable and start to share the real work challenge, which can then be resolved and performance grows. An insight I got is that a facilitator needs to be strong sometimes to guide participants to the correct behavior. Yes, and I know I mentioned a couple of times about, it's not necessarily about feeling completely comfortable. It is feeling comfortable to be challenged. I think that's important. So we don't want people to feel completely uncomfortable, but it is about feeling comfortable to be challenged. Anything more? Any more comments? Looks like the chat went quiet.
Great. It looks that, Jose, you made everyone very comfortable to be challenged later on. Be a bit more daring and put ourselves in the picture much more than we used to do. Thank you so much for sharing all these tips. That'd be really helpful and definitely something that we can rely on for our next group facilitation. And there are even many of these questions and many of these principles that can apply to one-on-one coaching as well, as we want them to feel definitely safe to share and open up. So thank you so much for your sharing today. and wishing everyone a great day ahead. This webinar is recorded, so you can watch the replay later on and revert to it. It will be on ACSM YouTube channel and Facebook page. And if you have any more questions and want to go and interact with Jose, feel comfortable to go to acsm.asia, and there is Jose profile, and we can definitely make you arrange to have you get in touch on that. Have a great day, everyone, and many, many thanks to Jose and to everyone who attended to this great webinar that we had the privilege to share.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Marianne, for giving this opportunity to share and to help the learning of everybody. Thank you.
Most welcome. Goodbye, everyone. Have a nice day.